Hi everyone, my name is Millie and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be talking about all of the books that I read in March. So in March I read a grand total of 18 books. This is more than I've read any other month this year and I'm really pleased with what I've read, especially after how disappointing February was as a reading month. March has definitely pulled itself back, pulled my reading back. Let's get into the stats first. So, as I said, I read 18 books and across those books I read a total of 6,693 pages. All of the books that I read this month were novels. I did not have any graphic novels or any novellas. This month I read 6 ebooks and 12 physical books. I really need to read more ebooks, which are my NetGalley reads. This month I read 10 adult books and 8 YA books, with no new adult, middle grade or children's books read. And once again, all of the books I read this month were fiction, with no non-fiction books read, which is no surprise to anybody. So let's get into the books I read. The first book that I read this month was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars, and this was actually one of my 24 books to read in 2024, so another one crossed off of the list. And I really like this one a lot. I'm not sure that I've fallen as in love with it as a lot of people do when they read it. I know that this is my friend Violet's, one of her favourite books, and I know that this does end up becoming a lot of people's favourite books when they read it. I'm not sure that it's reached that level of love for me with this book. But I do think that the short length of this book, I think it was 152 pages, was absolutely perfect. It didn't drag on and you got this whole story in such a short time, and it was really impactful considering how short it is. I think that the only thing for me was that, being a Brit, I kind of struggled to have this more emotional connection to the storyline along the lines of the American dream, but I do think that F. Scott Fitzgerald has a really wonderful way of writing and I am interested in reading more of his works. The second book that I read this month was The Absin Underground by Jamie Paxton. I ended up giving this 3 stars in the end. Despite it being a pretty short book for a fantasy, it was around 300 pages, I really struggled to get through this. I feel like if it had had another 50 to 100 pages, then we could have had a lot more character development, and as it was, I didn't feel connected to the characters, and it also took a really long time for it to actually get into the story of the Fae and going into the Fae world on this quest that they'd been sent on. So I think that it had a great concept and great potential, but the final product just didn't live up to what it could have been, which is unfortunate, but it might still work for some people. We then had my first 5-star read of the month, and my first 5-star read since January, and that was Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. I can't even begin to talk about this book, honestly. It ripped my heart out. I cried multiple times while reading it. You can see that in my very first vlog. And honestly, from the very first page, I knew that this book was going to be 5 stars. Just the eloquence of the writing and how Fredrik Backman seems to capture the human experience in less than 400 pages is just incredible. I would recommend this to absolutely anybody. I can't even articulate how I feel about it. It was just so poignant and personal, and I absolutely loved it. 5 stars. 5 stars. We then in fact had 2 5-star reads in a row, because I then had another 5-star read with my most anticipated release of the whole year, Funny Story by Emily Henry. I can't believe I have a proof of this in my hands. I'm so thankful to the publisher for sending this to me. Emily Henry literally can do no wrong in my eyes. She just puts out masterpieces year after year and they just keep getting better and better. No one is doing it like her. Honestly, everything that she writes feels like it was pulled from my brain. Like that she went into the deepest parts of my brain, had a little look around, thought about what book do I need to read at this exact moment, and then wrote it. Like, is she spying on me? The pacing was perfect. I was engaged throughout the whole book. Daphne and Miles have my whole heart. Where do I find a Miles, first of all? And Although the title is Funny Story, it's an emotional read. Emily Henry's books are not always just straight up rom-coms. They have an emotional heart to them, and this one definitely did. A lot of it was about healing from heartbreak and from your past, and I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. I could not recommend it enough. Emily Henry, you are the queen. The next book that I read was Neferura. This is a Egyptian historical fantasy, but it didn't have enough fantasy for me, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. So Neferura by Milena Evans. I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, you could clearly see the research that this author had done. I did feel really immersed in the world of ancient Egypt, but I just felt there were so many characters in this. A lot of this book is about politics and court dramas and stuff like that, and there were so many characters. I could not tell you the difference between any of them, apart from literally the main character Neferura and her mother the pharaoh. I don't know who anybody was, and I could not tell you now. If someone held a gun to my head, I couldn't name them. And I found this book quite difficult to get through, I think because although it is marketed as a historical fantasy, there isn't any fantasy elements. Like, it is just a historical fiction. So possibly if I'd known that going in, then my expectations of it would have been a bit different, but I just kept waiting for some kind of magic to happen, and it didn't. So I feel like it was a marketing kind of tactic gone wrong, essentially. And the ending was really, really abrupt as well. You could almost feel like this might turn into a series with how the ending was, but I believe it is only planned to be a standalone, so I don't know. I rated it 3 stars. The next book that I read was Their Vicious Games by Joelle Wellington. I ended up giving this 4 stars. It is kind of Inheritance Games-esque. It's kind of Hunger Games-esque. It's kind of Stags-esque. So Stags by M.A. Bennett. It really reminded me of that. It focuses on this thing called The Finish, where 12 girls are essentially pitted against each other and have to do these tasks in order to win a huge fortune, essentially, and win all these opportunities in life. But when a finish happens during a year when a member of a certain family is coming of age, then in fact the final prize is to be this guy's wife. So a little bit confusing as to how that would actually work. And it was really fast and quite addictive to read, and it does also bring a lot of important topics to the forefront, including class disparity, racial injustice, and violence as well. And it did feel quite unhinged. I think I struggled with the characters in this. The main character, Adina, I just never felt particularly endeared to her, so I wasn't necessarily rooting for her to win throughout this, which, when you're faced with tasks which are putting your life at risk, you want to be rooting for the main character to live. I am really pleased with how the story wrapped up as well, though. I feel like it had a really solid ending, which for a book that is quite unhinged, you could have had an ending which just felt a bit thrown together, but I felt that this had a really solid ending, so it was 4 stars in the end for me. I just wish I'd connected to the characters more. I then read Valy Verified by Kyla Zhao, and I gave this 2.5 stars. This is a adult romance which offers a look behind the world of tech and the world of fashion. So we're following Zoe, who was a fashion writer, and then she is given a job by a guy who is creating an app, and she becomes like the marketing person for this app, which is an app that does talk about fashion, but she has to move from her life in New York working for a fashion magazine to LA, to Silicon Valley. And I think that this does have a kind of unique concept. I'm not sure that I've ever really read books before which do offer this kind of look behind Silicon Valley. It's not really something that I'm that interested in, and I just found myself not really wanting to pick this book up. It reads very YA for a book that is classed as adult, and a lot of the characters felt really two-dimensional. There were 2 side characters who Zoe worked with, who were both these kind of tech bros, and I could not tell you the difference between them at all. Like, they were the same person to me. And a lot of this book also just felt really unrealistic. Like, she was offered a job by the CEO within literally 5 minutes of meeting him. He'd done no background check, looked at her resume, he had no idea who she was, and she was just offered a job. I found it hard to just suspend my disbelief over that, because it wasn't even written in a way that could be kind of plausible. Unfortunately, I feel with this book that this has kind of solidified that this author is just not for me, because I didn't really like her debut, The Fraud Squad, either. I think it's just a case of me and this author, we just don't gel, and that's okay. Something which didn't help Valy Verified's opinion in my mind was the fact that I was reading it alongside reading As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Katu, which I gave 4.5 stars and loved. Like, absolutely loved. The characters in this felt so genuinely real to me, and I was so emotional over the story, although the half star is taken away because I didn't get as emotional as I was kind of expecting to. But this is an incredible book and one that everyone should read. I know that everyone's pretty much heard of this because it was obviously absolutely massive when it came out, and rightly so, and I'm really, really glad to have finally read it. This is a novel set in war-torn Syria, and we're following Salama, who is working as a surgeon during the war, and it's a really emotional read. There's a lot of discussion about family and love, and about the love for your country versus the love for your loved ones and wanting them to be safe. I could not recommend this enough. I think it's one that everyone should read. And I then read my third 5-star read of the month, which was My Throat, An Open Grave by Tori Bovolino. This was amazing. It's only about 200 pages long, so I was not expecting to have this kind of fully formed story in only 200 pages, but boy does the author do it amazingly. This book invites you to fall under the spell of the Lord of the Wood, and it was dark and creepy and twisted and really atmospheric. There was a romance which I wasn't expecting, and the chemistry was so good, and the tone of the romance as well also really fit this book. And the main character was really complex, and I loved getting to see her growth over just 200 pages, and it was amazing. If you have been thinking about picking this book up, do it. Just do it. The next book that I picked up was also a really great read, and that was A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal. I gave this 4 stars in the end, but really, really great book. This had 3 point of views in it, and I think I would have preferred if we'd just stuck to Arfi and Jin's point of view. I'm not sure that Flix necessarily added anything to the book, but this was incredible. This has vampires and a heist, and it's pitched as Six of Crows meets Peaky Blinders meets King Arthur, and it was so good. It was enjoyable and suspenseful and intriguing, and there are 2 romances in this book, and I loved both of them. I was rooting for both of them, and it's definitely a YA fantasy worth reading, and I need the sequel after that ending today. Give it to me. I'm going to talk about the next 4 books altogether because they are all part of a series, so I did finish this whole series this month, and I finished it in a week. I finished the final 4 books of the Chestnut Springs series by Elsie Silver. This is a series of cowboy romances. That's kind of all you need to know. So the second book in the series is Heartless, and this follows Cade and Willa. It's age gap romance, single dad trope, nanny trope, and I loved it. It was my favourite book of the series. I gave this 4 stars in the end. I really loved this book. It was so great. The chemistry between Cade and Willa was amazing, and it was also a really emotionally impactful read as well because they are building a family, they are learning to trust one another after Cade's heart was broken, and it was just so good. The third book in the series is Powerless, and that was a 3-star read for me. Fortunately, this was my least favourite of the series, and that is because the main couple in this are technically cousins. So, not really sure why Elsie Silver did that. I think because I knew that they were technically cousins, I just didn't feel the chemistry between them. I didn't connect to the characters, and not my fave. Not my fave in the series. The 4th book in the series is Reckless, and this was my second favourite of the series. I really, really loved this. This also was really emotionally impactful, and I really loved getting to see how the female main character, Winter, learns to grow and trust herself and open herself up to people, because her whole life she's kind of believed that she isn't worthy of being loved, and she's been told that by her mum, by just her parents in general, by her ex-husband, and I really just loved getting to see Theo bring out Winter's softer side, and yeah, it was so cute. I loved it. And the final book in the series is Hopeless. I gave this 3.5 stars in the end. I finished this literally in 2 hours straight. because I started it at 22:11 on the final day of my reading challenge for the series, and I was like, well, I can't go to sleep until I finished it, otherwise I failed. So I finished it in 2 hours, and I did really enjoy this. I thought that the characters had great banter and really great chemistry. It was a really funny book. There was a lot of wit and humour to it. And this book also does deal with quite difficult topics in terms of PTSD. So Bo, the male main character in this, does have PTSD from being in the military. And I thought that it was handled really carefully, so I really enjoyed that aspect. There was just a certain scene in this book, which, if you know, you know, that lowered my rating. So that was that. In between reading those books, I did finish a NetGalley arc, and that was In the Shallows by Tanya Byrne. This was my least favourite read of the month. I gave it 2 stars, and unfortunately this means that I won't be continuing with the author's debut, which was Afterlove. So this is a sapphic YA contemporary which follows a girl called Mara and a girl called Nico, and they sort of see each other for a couple of months, and then on New Year's Eve Nico is in a sort of accident out at sea and loses all of her memory, like total amnesia. So she has no idea who she is, she has no idea who her friends are, who Mara is, who even her family are. I was kind of expecting there to be a kind of bigger mystery element around how she was in this accident. And while we did discover what the cause of the accident was and like why it happened to her, it felt a bit anticlimactic. And I also just really didn't like any of the characters. Mara was really annoying and completely obsessed with Nico, and Nico was awful to her. I couldn't understand why we were meant to be rooting for them to be together, because they were not good together at all. And once again, this was a book where all of the side characters felt like the exact same person. I don't know what the trend was with some of my lower rated reads this month, with side characters just all feeling completely indistinguishable from each other, but Mara had about 5 friends who were all the same person to me. They all acted the same, they all talked the same. I couldn't tell you the difference between any of them. And yeah, it was my least favourite read of the month, so that's unfortunate, and it does mean that I'm probably going to unhaul the author's debut, Afterlove, because I don't really see myself liking it now after not enjoying the author's second book. On to the final 3 books I read this month. So the next book that I read was One Last Breath by Ginny Myers Sane. This is my second Ginny Myers Sane book that I've read, but her third to be published. I think that her books are amazing YA mysteries. If you love a YA mystery, I would really recommend picking up her books. And even if you are more of a fantasy reader but looking to get more into mysteries or thrillers, I would definitely say to try a Ginny Myers Sane book, because they do have supernatural elements to them. In this one, we're following True, who lives in this town where 20 years ago there was a brutal murder of 2 girls. And the town has never forgotten it, but the killer was never found. In this one we had a supernatural element which incorporated reincarnation and past lives, and I really liked how that was done. It's very difficult to say it without spoiling the ending, obviously, but the way that the past lives element played into the ending made it just a little bit difficult to suspend my disbelief over the ending, so that is why I've taken a star off and just rated it 4 stars. But this was really perfectly paced. It was twisty-turny right up until the end, and it was so tense. With it being set in Florida, you can feel the humidity, you can feel this kind of small town vibes, and it felt really claustrophobic, which really worked for this book. And I just felt like I could sense the killer around the corner constantly. And another element which added to the kind of claustrophobicness of it was the grief hovering over the town after, you know, the murder that was 20 years ago. It's still playing a really prevalent role in the town's life today, and I just think the author did a really great job of this one, and I really want to pick up her second book, which I haven't read yet, which was Secrets So Deep. A really great read, would highly recommend. The final NetGalley book that I picked up this month was The Poisons We Drink by Bethany Baptiste. I ended up giving this 3 stars, And I think that this book suffered both from my own mental health at the time of reading it, because I was not really in a place to be paying attention to a fantasy book, so that didn't help, but also because it was just dragging and it played too much into focusing on the politics of the world and not enough time focused on the magic system. So magic system really focuses on potions, and we just didn't get enough of that. And I'm really sad that I did not end up enjoying this, because I know that the author has been on a difficult publishing journey with this book. There's been a lot of pushbacks, there's been a lot of delays, and obviously there was that whole thing with the book being review bombed by a certain other author. So I really did want to like this, but unfortunately I just think it just wasn't for me, and it was also just bad timing of me reading this book during a time when my brain couldn't really focus. So I'm not, not recommending this book. I think that if you like potions, if you like magic systems, if you like more political fantasy books as well, and you're also looking for YA books which might transition more into adult, then I would still say to pick this up. I think it was just a wrong timing thing for me. And then we did in fact end the month on a high, because I finished the month reading A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen, and I gave this 4.75 stars, but I'm debating whether it is a 5-star read, which would make it my 4th 5-star of the month. I love this. This is a Norse mythology Vikings inspired book, and we're following Freya, who is discovered to be the Shield Maiden, and she is prophesized to whoever controls her will become king. And it was really addictive to read. This was my first Danielle L. Jensen book that I've read, but I really want to pick up her other books now, especially the Bridge Kingdom series, because this was fantasy romance at its finest. The chemistry between the two characters in this was insane. Bjorn, what a man. It was also incredibly well written. I felt really transported into the world. I felt like I was there, like I was seeing it all happen around me. And the ending, it had me squealing. It probably wasn't that surprising of an ending, but I think because I read the last 150 pages just in one go, and I think I was just so immersed into the story and into these characters, into Freya's mind as well, that the ending did shock me, and I was just like, what's happening? And I desperately need the sequel right now. So I am pleased to say that March was definitely a better reading month for me than February was. I don't know what happened in February, we're just going to write it off. But March was such a better reading month. I had 3 5-star reads, potentially 4 if I do end up changing my rating of A Fate Inked in Blood, and I just had a really great time. I really loved a lot of the books I read this month. Even if they weren't necessarily 5-star reads, I still had a great time reading a lot of them, and it was a fun reading month. I had a reading challenge, I finished a whole series in this month. I read a lot of books that I'd been eyeing up for a while, so like A Tempest of Tea, Fate Inked in Blood, Anxious People. Those are ones I've been wanting to pick up for a while, so I'm really glad I got to them. I read 3 books off of my 2024 TBR, so that was great, and I read my most anticipated release of the year. So as I said, Funny Story was my favourite read of this month. How could it not be? And I'm really glad to have read it. If you liked any of the books in this video, then please let me know in the comments below which books you've liked, if there were any books that you liked which I didn't, or any books you didn't like that I loved. Let me know what you thought of these books in the comments if you've read them. And also let me know what your favourite read of March was. I'm really interested to find out what books I should be picking up. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye!